Right, it's Chris over at Dixieland Farm, and this is going to be a long video. Stuff that's been on my mind, posts I've seen, videos, Facebook posts, and I'm going to try to be as respectful as possible, though, you know, if you have something different to say than somebody else, you know, it gets funny. So, you know, I've been kind of hesitant about making this video, but give you a little bit of a background. I'm an amateur radio operator. I've taken the extra amateur radio test. That's the highest level test they have. It's similar to, I think, the second radio class commercial license. A lot of theory, a lot of schematics, you know. I also take, I have taken in the past a correspondence course on electronics. I've designed my own circuits. I've built my own equipment. So I know a little bit. An amateur. And I've heard some things that are just kind of contrary to everything that I've learned. And it's funny, a lot of people are, you know, show me the science in everything except audio for some reason. Just simple, scientific, logical things are thrown out the window. And this is my response video. So, again, hopefully nobody's too offended, but my opinion, partly based on fact, mostly based on fact and logic and all that kind of stuff. So, first thing is, you know, I see often on the VC Facebook page younger people going on about vinyl and how great vinyl sounds, and then when you see pictures of their setup, there is no way possible that what they've got sounds good. Just a quick rule of thumb. If your turntable platter is plastic and the tone arm is plastic, there's no counterweight, there's no way to replace the cartridge, it's a good chance that record player does not sound good. And it's not like this has to be expensive. I bought my turntable was $25. I've seen turntables for $5. You know, but there's just some simple properties that, you know, deliver good sound that are just not followed. You know, one of those all-in-one unit Crosley things they're actually damaging. But you hear people going on, "This sounds great." There's no way it could possibly sound better than the CD part of that 3-in-1 also. Just the way it's playing, physically. Records are a physical medium. There's a physical thing going on. And there's a certain little bit of physics involved with that. And I've seen the same people, the speakers are directly next to the record player. So you've got this physical medium, physically moving a needle, and you've got speakers that are physically looping right back into the device and smearing and changing the sound. I've seen people on Rubbermaid containers. One speaker, one computer speaker. And they bought an $80 pressing, and they're listening on one computer speaker on a Rubbermaid container that's slightly warped. It's upsetting. It's upsetting when I see those things. And I used to in the beginning, you know, if I would see obvious mistakes, I would tell people, but I can't anymore because I come off sounding like a dick. So I don't. But there's just, again, it doesn't have to be expensive, but I've seen plenty of people spend way too much on their records and nothing on their equipment, and they're just immediately damaging the records by the equipment they're using. And it's not like this stuff is hard to find out how it works or what would sound good. And again, it doesn't have to be expensive. I bought an amp for somebody for $25. That's going to sound great. Cheaper than buying a standalone phono amp. It's the whole damn amp, the whole thing. And it's going to be great. And same thing with speakers. You know, onto the other part of it, right? The most important thing are physical things involved with vinyl playback. Cartridge moves. That's important. Everything else should be kind of neutral. So that's where you're paying for your money. You know, heavier equipment, tone arm that doesn't make noise, bearings that don't make noise. You know, all of that's where it comes. The platter spinning at a correct speed, consistently and strong, and also you can't hear the motor through the device. You know, and speakers. Speakers make the sound. And I'll see people go on and spend a fortune on a record player. They'll buy a music hall, $500, $1,000, same thing, cartridge, $250, and they play in a speaker this big. You can't move air on a speaker that big. It needs, and again, my speakers were $25. But you know, tapping them, you heard the bass, and everything was, you know, the wood was. MDF is actually the best wood because it's not very resonant, but you know, it wasn't cheap wood for the most part. That's the stuff that matters, and I see that mistake all the time. I saw a video of somebody showing a CD demagnetizer, and the comments said, "Oh, that's interesting." Again, not to be offensive, but you know, let's think about this, right? CDs are a digital thing, read with an optical laser. Number one, CDs are, for the most part, aluminum. Aluminum is not magnetic, so demagnetizing it won't make a difference. Let's say it did, right? Let's say it was filled with a magnetic field, right? The ferrous is really the term, but whatever. It's optical. Nothing's touching it. It's not a head like a hard drive. It's a laser. Can't see magnets. If you did, you'd see a whole bunch of fields everywhere. So on a Audiophile website, they were boasting a USB cable that the highs were more sparkle on the highs. The USB cable was for your DAC, for your digital audio converter. Right? It was $600. The whole point of USB and digital is it's digital. If something changed from one side or the other, the whole thing failed. And even at that, USB cables have error checking and checksums, and they go back and forth until it's bit perfect. But you see audiophiles for this stuff all the time, paying for that price for a cable that a $1 cable would do the exact same thing. Why do they think your taxes and video files and Word documents can handle complete errors and programs, right? But audio can't. The files are always uncorrupted. Otherwise, we'd be in a world of hurt if all of our digital files were always corrupted every time you transfer them. They have no problem copying one hard drive to another. They didn't buy audiophile cables for that. $600, and I'm not kidding. Same thing with HDMI cables. That's another one. People will often spend $30, $40, $50 for a monster HDMI cable. The exact same thing. It's digitally perfect. I'm not saying that the cheapest, worst cable doesn't sometimes cause errors, but come on. Really, it's really, your $3 cable will do the exact same job. That's the point of it. Power cables, switching out power cables, spending hundreds of dollars on power cables. Now, when you open up one of these devices, if the gauge of wire connecting from the power supply, where the power comes in, goes to the voltage regulator, is this thin, this is as thin as the cable needs to be. It's not like water. It goes from point A to point B. If it goes down to that, that's how big it needs to be. That's really the end of it. You making it bigger is not going to reject noise or do anything, especially for power. You know, people forget, or they just ignore. You know, nobody gave a crap when they ran the power in your house, except for it to be safe. There's a mountain of wires in your house. And you really think the last 6 feet are going to make the difference? It's going to make a little difference. At a little difference, $200 for a cable is ridiculous. And you get this a lot with audiophiles. Tone controls are terrible. You cannot have tone controls. They make the sound impure, right? Destroy what is intended. What you want is what sounds best for you, which is why you audition speakers, or you do if you can, because you want what sounds best for you, right? So swapping out an interconnect, a $1,000 interconnect, which is about 3 to 5 feet, going from one device to another, will change the sound, possibly. But so would the tone controls, which are part of any normal amp. I think what people are mostly hearing are these subtle changes. So the difference between a $100 cartridge, well, let's go a little bit better, right? Let's say a $250 cartridge and a $2,500 cartridge are slight, subtle equalizer differences, which you could have just bought an equalizer to do that. It's all in the finesse of the coil at that point. But a lot of people don't like to hear that kind of thing, and a lot of people probably be pissed off. So power cables, interconnect cables. I'm not saying the interconnect cables won't. Bigger interconnect cables are good if they're this thin. But at a certain gauge, they do nothing. They add nothing, especially at the distances you're traveling. Same thing in the recording studio, right? Where everything got recorded. They didn't use a $100 a foot cable. They used lamp cord for the most part, or something similar. You know what I mean? They used what the science behind it requires. So voltage regulators. You see audiophile setups with expensive voltage regulators, and especially the frequency, the hertz, to make sure it's rock stable. America is one of the greatest countries of stable electricity. It does not vary by a great amount, and almost every component that you own has a voltage regulator in it. And it's got a circuit design or chip, which is a circuit inside one little cube, to smooth out any irregularities and clean up the noise. I saw one VC member, he switched out a switching power supply, a smaller amperage one to a larger amperage one, figuring that more amps available would help. But again, it only takes the power it needs. Everything else is just wasted. And for an amplifier, there's a little bit of truth to it. A little bit. Not much, a little. But a passive line level device? No. And not only that, switching power supplies create more RFI, radio frequency interference, and noise than the old transformers. You would have been better off with one of the older, bigger wall wart transformers, which have less noise in them. Your switching power supply interjects more noise into things, which gets regulated out. I saw another video where they added an extra ground. The whole device of an amplifier is metal. All of this silver, that's all signal ground. Adding an extra one doesn't do anything, except perhaps create a ground loop and interject more noise into something. Having a single point ground is one of the most important things you can do in amateur radio, because what can happen is ground can travel through, noise can travel through the secondary ground and cause a ground loop hum. What your 3 cable XLRs balanced connections are trying to avoid. Just sticking one on there willy-nilly can actually cause more problems or nothing. It does nothing or perhaps causes more problems. Give you an example, a real-life example of a ground loop that happened yesterday. Electric fence was touching a metal post in the ground about 15 feet away from a water trough, and I saw the horse pawing at the ground. We didn't realize that would happen. He was getting shocked, even though the electric fence was touching the metal in the ground. What was happening was the signal was going, shunting to ground, which was fine. But then, when the horse took a drink of water, the electric decided then to go up through the horse, or in this case my hands. I put one hand on the ground, one hand in the water. I felt the shock. It wasn't bad, but it was going in the ground, up through me, through my body, into the water, into the ground wire of the heater in the water trough, and then having a better conductive path than straight to ground before, right? Because I had an additional ground, and it took the easier path, the noise, instead of being shunted where it should have been. Just like noise is often shunted to one specific spot. That's called a single point ground. By you introducing an additional ground, if it happens to be the least path of resistance, it'll take that instead, and hum will flow through. Or noise or whatever. So a lot of this stuff is designed very specifically to take care of that. Things are shielded specifically. That's why you have a ground wire on your phono cartridge, and other things don't. It's to shunt noise to where it should go. And yeah, I think I'm going to wrap it up right there. 17 minutes. So some of this stuff is trial and error, practice, knowledge, reading. It's confusing. The internet's confusing. You read a lot of conflicting things. But honestly, for speaker wires, here's another example, right? So you'll see Audiophile, sometimes they'll have their speaker wires on raised platforms, and the raised platforms they spent $100, $200, $300 for to get the. They were saying that it deflects the signal in the ground, or being that close to the ground. Why couldn't you just use clothespins or whatever, pucks, hockey pucks, whatever? But they'll spend that much. Same thing with the feet to isolate equipment. Bit rate, I'll go one more thing. I'm already here. You've already been wasting this time watching me, but often you'll find people will not do double-blind tests, scientific tests, what you would do in everything. I did one of my equipment and setup, and a critique would be, well, then your equipment's not good enough. But I tested with 3 different people. And what I did was I took Big Star #1 record, and I know that's the same mastering as the CD, and I had made an MP3 file of it at 192 kilohertz. I did the same thing also with Pet Sounds, a 1974 mastering, and then the first issue of the CD, which has got some age on it, but was roughly the same mastering. They just used the master tape, I believe, on that CD press. I could not hear the difference between the vinyl record, the CD, or the MP3. And that's not true. I heard a slight, I think I hear a difference on the MP3. Now, that's not saying, oh, this sounds like shit, I can't listen to this. What I heard was, well, it's a little different, I guess. No difference on Pet Sounds. So what does that prove? Chris, you have bad ears. Perhaps I'm not a young man. I worked on a tractor for many years and still do. A lot of rock concerts. But if I can't hear the difference, then spending another $10,000 on my equipment is not going to matter. I can't hear the difference. I'm not saying records aren't better, but well, they're not. That's the other thing. They're not. They're more fun. But getting over this, it sounds... What you're hearing often is you're hearing... Most people who listen to records listen to 60s, 70s, 80s music. Or 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, for the most part. What you're hearing, compared to the CD or download, is when it's pressed on vinyl, it's frozen in time. So, I'm listening to a 1958 recording, it's still 1958 to that vinyl record. And when the CD came along, let's say you got an early mastering, it had already been 20 years, 25 years, and the tape has degraded somewhat. Magnetic field has been used just in general. It slowly dissipates away. Doesn't stay locked forever. So I think that's what you're hearing. Or it's done with more care. Or you like the equalization that's going on. Every equipment sounds different. The CD is kind of flat. And you hear that all the time, right? But the record's gone through an RIAA curve. The bass had been dropped, treble had been boosted, and then reversed on playback. It's already had some playing around with it. The cartridge response is slightly different. Maybe that's what you're hearing. I'm not saying give up your records. I'm just saying let's get some perspective. All right, everybody. Bye.